The night the lone rancher walked into the smoke-filled back room of the Silver Spur Saloon, he wasn't looking to win anything. He hadn't planned to sit at the table. He certainly hadn't planned to change a life. He'd come because loneliness has a way of dragging a man into places he swore he'd never return to, and because the ranch was too quiet after sunset, echoing with memories of voices long gone. The men at the poker table laughed when they saw him. Dust on his boots, silence in his eyes, reputation heavy on his shoulders. They knew him as the man who spoke little, worked hard, and lived alone on a stretch of land most folks thought cursed. Cards were dealt. Whiskey flowed, stakes climbed, and then one drunken man, desperate and cruel, pushed something onto the table that made the room go still. A young Chinese woman standing near the wall, eyes lowered, hands clenched, treated like a debt instead of a human being. Someone muttered the word worthless, and the rancher's jaw tightened. When the final card turned, fate landed where it shouldn't have, his hand winning what should never have been wagered. The room erupted in laughter, but the rancher didn't smile. He stood, shoved the chips away, and said quietly that he wasn't there to own anyone. He took off his coat and placed it around the woman's shoulders, not touching her skin, not claiming her, just covering her from the stairs. Outside, the night air was cold, and she flinched like someone expecting punishment. Instead, he told her she was free. No conditions. No debt, no chains. She didn't believe him. No one ever had. When he offered her a ride to his ranch, not as property, but as a guest with a choice, she hesitated, then nodded, because hope, even fragile hope, is stronger than fear. The ride was silent, broken only by the wind and the creak of leather, but something shifted in that silence. By the time the ranch lights appeared on the horizon, she wasn't shaking anymore. And the lone rancher, who thought his heart had turned to dust years ago, felt something stir, something dangerous and alive. Soft voice for viewers. If you believe stories about dignity, redemption, and unexpected love deserve to be told, subscribe now, because this journey is just beginning. Life on the ranch did not become gentle overnight. Healing never does. The woman, who finally shared her name, Mei Lin, woke before dawn every morning, bracing herself for commands that never came. Instead, she found warm meals left on the table, a room prepared with clean blankets, and a man who knocked before entering, who asked instead of ordered, who listened more than he spoke. The rancher gave her work only when she asked for it, paid her wages she tried to refuse, and defended her fiercely when townsfolk whispered cruel rumors. Slowly, painfully, trust grew. Mei Lin learned the rhythms of the land, the way horses responded to kindness, the way silence could be peaceful instead of threatening. The rancher learned the sound of her laughter, rare at first, then blooming like spring after a brutal winter. When trouble came, as it always does, it came in the form of men who believed winning. A card game meant ownership. They arrived armed with threats and entitlement. The rancher stood between them and the woman who had become family, not with rage but with resolve. The law was called. Truth was spoken. And for the first time, Mei Lin watched men like that lose. Seasons passed. The ranch flourished. So did they. Love did not arrive loudly. It arrived in shared meals, in quiet conversations under the stars. In the moment she realized she was no longer surviving, but living, when the rancher finally asked her to stay, not because she had to, but because he hoped she wanted to. She answered by taking his hand, steady and unafraid. The girl once called worthless became the queen of her own life, not because a man crowned her, but because he treated her like a human being when the world refused to. And the lone rancher, who thought he'd lost everything, discovered that dignity, when given freely, has a way of returning as love. The trouble didn't truly end the night the lawman rode away. Peace, the rancher had learned, was never something that arrived and stayed forever. It had to be protected, sometimes at great cost. Weeks passed, and just when the ranch had begun to feel like a place of permanence instead of refuge, rumors crept back in like a cold wind through cracked boards. Men from Mei Lin's past, dealers, gamblers, shadows who trafficked in human misery, had heard whispers that the worthless girl they once discarded was alive, thriving and no longer afraid. They came not only for her, but to punish the man who had dared to break their unspoken rules. One evening, as the sun bled red across the hills, gunfire shattered the calm. Horses screamed. Windows burst. The rancher moved without hesitation, shielding Mei Lin, guiding her to safety not with words but with instinct, placing his own body between her and the violence he'd lived with all his life. In that moment, she understood something deeper than gratitude. She understood love born from choice, not obligation. The fight ended the way cruelty often does, exposed, defeated and dragged into the light of justice. When dawn arrived, it revealed a ranch scarred but standing, and two souls no longer running. Mei Lin wept for the life she'd lost, but also for the future she'd gained. The rancher, wounded but alive, finally allowed himself to believe he wasn't cursed, that maybe his purpose had been waiting quietly all along. Months later, under an open sky and surrounded by people who had come to respect what they once mocked, he asked her again, not to stay, but to walk beside him for the rest of their lives. She said yes, not with fear, not with debt in her eyes, but with strength. The ranch became more than land. It became a sanctuary for those with nowhere else to go. Mei Lin helped other women find freedom. The rancher found a family larger than he ever imagined. And the story the town once told, the story of a girl won in a poker game, changed forever. Now it was told as a reminder. No one is worthless, dignity is a choice, and sometimes the loneliest hearts are the ones capable of the greatest love. Years passed, not quietly, but richly, layered with seasons that brought both hardship and grace. The ranch that once echoed only with the lone rancher's footsteps now breathed with life. Children's laughter drifted across the fields in the mornings. Horses moved calmly through the corrals, tended by hands that had learned patience instead of fear. Travelers no longer spoke of the place as cursed land at the edge of nowhere. They called it the open ranch, a place where broken people were not questioned, only welcomed. Mei Lin stood at the heart of it all. Her past no longer a shadow that chased her, but a story she carried with strength. She never forgot where she came from. Not the pain, not the humiliation, not the nights when she believed she had no name and no future. But those memories no longer owned her. She used them to guide others, to recognize fear in quiet eyes, to speak gently where the world had once been cruel. Women arrived trembling, men arrived ashamed. Children arrived hungry, not just for food but for safety. And each one found the same thing, respect without conditions. The rancher watched it all with a quiet pride he never spoke aloud. Love had softened him, but it had also sharpened his purpose. He was no longer just a man defending his land. He was a guardian of dignity. At night, when the work was done and the stars spread wide above them, he and Mei Lin would sit on the porch in silence, hands entwined, knowing that peace did not need words. Sometimes she would lean her head on his shoulder, and he would think of the poker table, the laughter, the cruelty, and how close he'd come to walking away. How one choice had bent the course of so many lives. When the town elders later asked him why he'd done it, why he'd risked his name, his safety, his solitude, he answered simply, because no one should ever be treated as a thing. In the final years of their story, when age slowed their steps and silver touched their hair, the ranch still stood strong, its gates open, its lights warm against the dark. And when people spoke of Mei Lin, they no longer spoke of a girl from a card game. They spoke of a woman who turned suffering into sanctuary. When they spoke of the lone rancher, they spoke not of his guns or his silence, but of his mercy. And if you listened closely, you could hear the truth beneath every retelling, that a life is not defined by how it begins, but by the hands that choose to lift it up. Final call to viewers. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that kindness can rewrite fate, subscribe to the channel. More long, emotional stories like this are waiting for you, and your support helps keep these voices alive.